Hi, page 577. Gradually, the economy of the archipelago prospered. New railroad branch lines were built, and soon they were transporting prisoners by train to many places that had been reached only by water not long before. But there are natives of the archipelago still alive who can tell you how they went down the Ishma River in genuine ancient Russian river galleys, 100 to a boat, and the prisoners themselves did the rowing. They can tell you how they traveled in fishing smacks down the northern rivers of Ukta, Usa, and Pechora to their native camp. Sex were shipped to Vorkuta in barges, on large barges to Adspavam, where there was a trans-shipping point for GULag, and from there only a stone's throw, let's say, to Ust-Usa on a flat-bottomed barge for 10 days. The whole barge was alive with lice, and the convoy allowed the prisoners to go up on deck one by one and brush the parasites off into the water. The river transports did not proceed directly to their destination either, but were sometimes interrupted to transfer for transshipment or for portage or for stretches covered on foot. And they had their own transit prisons in this area, built out of poles. Excuse me, built out of poles or tents. Ust-Usa, Pomosdino, Shelia Yor, where they had their own special system of regulations. They had their own convoy rules, and of course, their own special commands, and their own special convoy tricks, and their own special methods of tormenting the Zeks. But it's clear that it is not our task to describe those particular exotica, so we won't even begin. The northern Dvina, the Ob, and the Yenisei know when they began to hold prisoners in barges during the liquidation of the kulaks. These rivers flowed straight north, and their barges were pot-bellied and capacious. And it was the only way they could cope with the task of carting all this gray mass from living Russia to the dead north. People were thrown into the trough-like holds, and lay there in piles or crawled around like crabs in a basket. And high up on deck, as though atop a cliff, stood guards. Sometimes they transported this mass out in the open without any cover, and sometimes they covered it with a big tarp, in order not to look at it, or to guard it better, but certainly not to keep the rain off. The journey in such a barge was no longer prisoner transport, but simply death on the installment plan. Anyway, they gave them hardly anything to eat. Then they tossed them out in the tundra, and there they didn't give them anything to eat at all. They just left them there to die, alone with nature. Prisoner transport by barge on the northern Dvina and on the Vishchegda had not died out even by 1940. That was how A.Y. Olenev was transported. Prisoners in the hold stood tightly jammed against each other, and not just for a day either. They urinated in glass jars, which were passed from hand to hand and emptied through the porthole, and anything more substantial went right in their pants. Barge transport on the Yenisei came to be a regular, permanent feature for whole decades. In Krasnoyarsk, in the 30s, open-sided sheds were built on the bank, and in the cold Siberian winters, the prisoners would shiver there for a day or two while they waited for transportation. The Yenisei prisoner transport barges were permanently equipped with dark holds, 3 decks deep. The only light was filtered through the companionway for the ship's ladder. The convoy lived in a little cabin on deck. Sentries kept watch over the exits from the hold and over the river to make sure no one had escaped by swimming. They didn't go down into the hold, no matter what groans and howls for help might come from there, and the prisoners were never taken up on deck for fresh air. In the prisoner transports of 1937, 38, and 44, 45, and we can guess it must have been the same in the interval. No medical assistance whatever was provided in the hold. The prisoners lay there, lined up in 2 rows, one with their heads toward the side of the barge and the heads of the other row at their feet. The only way to get the latrine barrels was to walk over them. The latrine barrels were not always emptied in time. Imagine lugging that barrel full of sewage up the steep ship's ladder to the deck. They overflowed and the contents spilled along the deck and seeped down onto those below. And people lay there. They were fed gruel from casks hauled along the deck. The servers were prisoners too, and there, in the eternal darkness, today perhaps there is electricity, by the light of portable kerosene lamp, they ladled out food. Such a prisoner transport to Dudinka sometimes took a month. Nowadays, of course, they can do it in a week. It sometimes happened that the trip dragged out much longer because of sandbars and other hazards of river travel, and they wouldn't have enough food with them, in which case they just stopped giving out food for several days at a time. And later on, of course, they never made up for the days they missed. At this point, the alert reader can, without the author's help, add that the thieves were on the upper level inside the hold and closer to the ship's ladder, in other words, to light and air. They had what access they required to the distribution of the bread ration, and if the trick in question was a hard one, they didn't hesitate to whip away the holy crutch. In other words, they took the gray cattle's ration from them. The thieves whiled away the long journey playing cards, and they made their own decks. They got the stakes for their card game by frisking the suckers, searching everyone lying in a particular section of the barge. For a certain length of time they won and lost, and re-won and re-lost their loot, and then it floated up to the convoy. Yes, the reader has now guessed everything. The thieves had the convoy on the hook. The convoy either kept the stolen things for themselves, or sold them at the wharves, and brought the thieves something to eat in exchange. And what about resistance? It happened, but only rarely. One case has been preserved, in 1950, on such a barge as I have described, except that it was larger, a sea-going barge, en route from Vladivostok to Sakhalin. 7 unarmed 58s resisted the thieves, in this case, bitches, who numbered about 80 in all, some with knives as usual. These bitches had searched the whole transport back at Vladivostok, transit point 310, and they searched it very thoroughly, in no way less efficiently than the jailers. They knew all the hiding places, but no search can turn up everything. Aware of this, when they were already in the hold, they treacherously announced, "Whoever has money can buy Mahorka." And Misha Grachev got out 3 rubles he had hidden in his quilted jacket. And the bitch, Volodka Tatarin, shouted at him, "You crowbait, why don't you pay your taxes?" And he rushed to take it away. But Master Sergeant Pavel, whose last name had not been recorded, pushed him away. Volodka Tatarin aimed a slingshot a V fork at Pavel's eyes, and Pavel knocked him off his feet. Immediately, 20 to 30 bitches moved in on him, and around Khrushchev and Pavel stood Volodya Shupakov, a former army captain, Potapov, Runov, a former army sergeant, Tretukin, another former sergeant, and Vaza Kravstov. And what happened? The whole thing ended after only a few blows had been exchanged. This may have been a matter of the age-old and very real cowardice of the thieves, always concealed behind feigned toughness and devil-may-care insolence, or else the proximity of the guard held them back, this being right beneath the hatchway. Or it may have been that on this trip they were saving themselves for a more important social task, to seize control of the Alexandrovsk transit prison, the one Chekhov described, and the Sakhalin construction project, seizing control of it, of course, not in order to construct. For the honest thieves could, at any rate. They pulled back, restricting themselves to the threat. On dry land we'll make garbage out of you. The battle never took place, and no one made garbage out of the boys. And at the Alexandrovsk transit point, the bitches met with misfortune. It was already firmly held by the honest thieves. In the steamships to the Kolyma, everything was the same as on the barges, except that everything was on a larger scale. Strange as it seems, some of the prisoners were sent to the Kolyma in several overage old tubs. On the famous expedition led by the icebreaker Krasin in the spring of 1938 are still alive today. On the steamers Dezhurma, Kulu, Novostroy, Dnipropetrovsk, for which the Krasin was breaking the way through the spring ice, there were also 3 decks in the cold, dirty holds, and on these decks, in addition, there were 2-story bunks made out of poles. It was not completely dark. There were some kerosene lanterns and lamps. The prisoners were allowed up on deck in batches for fresh air and walks. 3,000 to 4,000 prisoners were in each steamer. The voyage took more than a week, and before it was all over, the bread brought aboard the Vladivostok got moldy, and the ration was reduced from 21 to 14 ounces a day. They also gave out fish, and as for drinking water, well, there's no reason to gloat here, because there were temporary difficulties with the water. Here, in contrast to the river transports, there were heavy seas, storms, and seasickness. The exhausted, enfeebled people vomited and didn't have the strength to get up out of their vomit, and the floors were covered with a nauseating mess. There was one political incident on the voyage. The steamers had to pass through Leperouse Strait, very close to the Japanese islands, and at that point the machine guns disappeared from the watchtowers, and the convoy guards changed to civilian clothes. The hatches were battened down, and access to the decks was forbidden, according to the ship's papers, foresightly prepared. Back in Vladivostok, they were transporting, God save us, not prisoners, but volunteers for work in the Kolyma. A multitude of Japanese small craft and boats hovered about the ships without suspecting. And on another occasion in 1938, there was an incident involving the Dezhurma. The thieves aboard got out of the hold and into the storage room, plundered it, and set it afire. The ship was very close to Japan when this occurred. Smoke was pouring from it, and the Japanese offered help, but the captain refused to accept it and even refused to open the hatches. When the Japanese had been left behind, the corpses of those suffocated by smoke were thrown overboard, and the half-burned, half-spoiled food aboard was sent on to camp as rations for the prisoners. Short of Macadam, the ship Caravan got caught in the ice, and not even the crossing could help. It was too early for navigation, but they had been in a hurry to deliver laborers. On May 2nd, they disembarked the prisoners on the ice, some distance from the shore. Newly arrived prisoners got a look at the cheerless panorama of the Magadan at that time. Dead hillocks, neither trees nor bushes nor birds, just a few wooden houses and the two-story building of Dalstroy. Nonetheless, continuing to play out the farce of correction, in other words, pretending they had brought not simply bones with which to pave the gold-bearing column but temporary insulated Soviet citizens who would yet return to creative life. They were greeted by the Dalstroy Orchestra. The orchestra played marches and waltzes, and the tormented, half-dead people strung along the ice in a grey line, dragging their Moscow belongings with them. And this enormous prisoner transport consisted almost entirely of politicals who had hardly encountered a single thief yet, and carrying on their shoulders other half-dead prisoners. Our threaded sufferers or prisoners without legs, and the legless too got prison terms. But here I note that I am again beginning to repeat myself, and this will be boring to write and boring to read, because the reader already knows everything that's going to happen ahead of time. The prisoners would be trucked hundreds of miles and driven dozens of miles more on foot, and on arriving, they would occupy new campsites and immediately be sent out to work, and they would eat fish and flour, chase down with snow, and sleep in tents. Yes, it was like that. But first the authorities would put them up in Magadan, also in Arctic tents, and would commission them there too. In other words, examine them naked to determine their fitness for labor from the condition of their buttocks, and all of them would turn out to be fit. In addition, of course, they would be taken to a bath, and in the bath vestibule they would be ordered to leave their leather coats, their Romanov sheepskin coats, their woolen sweaters, their suits of fine wool, their felt coats, their leather boots, their felt boots. For, after all, these were no illiterate peasants this time, but the party elite, editors of newspapers, directors of trusts and factories, responsible officials in the provincial party committees, professors of political economy, and by the beginning of the 30s, all of them understood what good merchandise was. And who is going to guard them? The newcomers asked skeptically, "Oh, come on now, who needs your things?" The bath personnel acted offended. "Go on in, don't worry." And they did go in, and the exit was through a different door, and after passing through it, they received black cotton breeches, field shirts, camp quilted jackets without pockets, and pigskin shoes. Oh, this was no small thing. This was farewell to your former life, to your titles, to your positions, and your arrogance. "Where are our things?" they cried. "Your things you left at home." Some chief or other bellowed at them. "In camp, nothing belongs to you. Here in camp, we have communism. Forward march, leader." And if it was communism, then what was there for them to object to? This is what they had dedicated their lives to. And there are also prisoner transports in carts and simply on foot. Do you remember in Tolstoy's Resurrection, how on a sunny day they drove them on foot from the prison to the railroad station? Well, in Minusink in 1940 something, after the prisoners had been taken into the fresh air for a whole year, they had forgotten how to walk, to breathe, to look at the light, hadn't been taken into the fresh air for a full year. And then they took them out, put them in formation, and drove them 15 miles to Abakan on foot. About a dozen of them died along the way, and no one is ever going to write a great novel about it. Not even one chapter. If you live in a graveyard, you can't weep for everyone. A prisoner transport on foot. That was the grandfather of prisoner transport by rail, of the Stolypin car, and of the red cattle carts too. In our time, it is used less and less, and only where mechanical transportation is still impossible. That's in one sector of Lake Ladoga. The prisoners were sent on foot from besieged Leningrad to the red cars, nicknamed the Red Cows. They led the women together with the German POWs and used bayonets to keep our men away from them so they couldn't take their bread. Those who fell by the wayside were immediately tossed up onto the truck alive or dead, and their shoes were removed. And in the 30s, each day they sent off on foot from the cultist transit prison to Ust-Fin, about 185 miles, and sometimes to Chibiu, more than 300 miles, a transport of 100 prisoners. Once in 1938, they sent off a woman's prisoner transport the same way. These traipsers covered 15 miles a day. The convoy marched along with 1 or 2 dogs, and those who fell behind were urged on with gun stocks. True, the prisoners' possessions as well as the cooking pot and the food brought up the rear in carts, and this transport thus recalled the classic prisoner transport of the past century. There were also prisoner transport huts, the ruined houses of liquidated Gulag, with windows broken and doors ripped off. The accounting office of the cultist transit prison had issued provisions to the transport based on theoretical estimate of the time the journey would take, provided nothing went wrong along the way, without allowing for even one extra day, the basic principle of all our accounting. Whenever delays occurred en route, they had to stretch out the provisions and fed the prisoners a mash of rye flour with salt, and sometimes nothing at all. In this respect, they departed from the classic model. In 1940, Olenyev's prisoner transport, after disembarking from the barge, was herded on foot through the taiga from the Knazh Pogast to Chibiu without anything to eat at all. They drank spot water and very quickly got dysentery. Some fell by the wayside out of weakness, and the dogs tore the clothes off of those who had fallen. In Izhma, they caught fish by using their trousers as nets and ate them alive. And in a certain meadow, they were told, right here is where you are going to build a railroad from Kotlas to Vorkuta. And in other areas of our European north, prisoner transports on foot were standard until the time when, on those same routes and railroads built by those earlier Czechs, the jolly red cattle cars rolled along carrying later prisoners. A particular technique for prisoner transports on foot was worked out when such transports were frequent and abundant. When a transport is being taken through the taiga from Knazh Pogast to Vesliana, and suddenly some prisoner falls by the wayside and could go no further, what is to be done with him? Just be reasonable and think about it. What? You aren't going to stop the whole transport, are you? And you aren't going to leave one soldier behind for everyone who falls. There are many prisoners and only a few soldiers. And what does that mean? The soldier stays behind for a little while with the fallen prisoner, and then hurries on to catch up with the rest, alone. Regular transports on foot from Caravans to Spassk were retained for a long time. It was only 20 to 25 miles, but it had been covered in one day, with 1,000 prisoners in each transport, many of them very weak. It was expected in cases like these that many would simply either drop in their tracks or else fall behind through the indifference and apathy of dying men. You may shoot at them, but they still can't go on. They are not afraid of death. But what about clubs? The indefatigable beating of the clubs wherever they hit. They are afraid of clubs, and they will keep going. This is a tested method. That's how it works. And so in these cases, the transport column is surrounded not only by the ordinary chain of machine gunners at a distance of 50 yards, but also by an inner chain of soldiers armed only with clubs. Those who have fallen behind get beaten, as in fact Comrade Stalin prophesied. They are beaten again and again, and even when they have no strength at all which to go any further, they keep going. And many do miraculously get to the destination. They don't know that this is a testing by club, and that those who lie down and stay lying down don't go on despite the clubs, are picked up by the carts following behind. That's organizational experience for you. And one can ask, why then didn't take them all on carts in the first place? But where could enough carts be found? And horses? And after all, we have tractors. What about the price of oats nowadays? Such transports as these were still common in 1948-50. And in the 20s, transport on foot was one of the basic methods. I was a small boy, but I remember very well how they drove them down the streets of Rostov on the Don without any qualms, and the famous order, "Will open fire without warning," had a different ring at that time, again because of difference in technology. After all, the convoy often had only sabers. They used to deliver orders like this: one step out of line and the convoy guard will shoot and slash. That had a very powerful sound, shoot and slash. You could imagine them cutting off your head from behind. Yes, and even in February 1936, they drove on foot through Nizhny Novgorod, a transport of long-bearded old men from the other side of the Volga, in their homespun coats, and in real lapti, other side of the Volga, wrapped around the onuchi, Russian peasant footcloths, old Russian disappearing, and all of a sudden, right across their path came 3 automobiles, in one of which rode the chairman of the Central Executive Committee, President of the Soviet Union, this is to say, Kalinin. The prisoner transport halted. Kalinin went on through. He wasn't interested. Shutter your eyes, reader. Do you hear the thundering of wheels? Those are the Stolypin cars rolling on and on. Those are the red cows rolling, every minute of the day, and every day of the year. And you can hear the water gurgling. Those prisoner barges are moving on, and the motors of the Black Marias roar. They are arresting someone all the time, cramming him in somewhere, moving him about. And what is that hum you hear? The overcrowded cells of the transport prisons. And that cry? The complaints of those who have been plundered, raped, beaten within an inch of their lives. We have reviewed and considered all the methods of delivering prisoners, and we have found that they are all worse. We have examined the transit prisons, but we have not found any that were good. And even the last human hope that there is something better ahead, that it will be better in camp, is a false hope. In camp, it will be worse. Wow. It's exhausting to think about it. Thank you for listening. Have a nice night. And it's almost Christmas. I hope you celebrate something, even if it's just being alive. Have a good night.